The Paracas skulls, one of the most baffling archaeological mysteries ever uncovered, continue to fascinate scientists and truth seekers around the world. With shapes so unusual, they seem to defy human biology itself. These ancient relics were long dismissed as myths, until modern DNA testing changed everything. What the researchers found was so shocking it shook the very foundations of history and science, revealing a truth so unsettling that many still refuse to believe it. But what exactly was hidden within these skulls that left scientists speechless? To understand the impact of this discovery, we must travel back in time to 1927 and follow an expedition that forever changed our understanding of Peru's ancient civilizations. In the dry, sun-scorched lands of the Paracas Peninsula, under relentless winds and golden sand, Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello was carefully unearthing the secrets of the past. What he found beneath the desert surface defied all expectations. A vast burial complex filled with elongated skulls, unlike anything ever seen before. And this is where the story turns mysterious, scientific, and deeply controversial. A journey that makes us question everything we think we know about human origins. But before we dive deeper into this incredible mystery, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories that will challenge your perception of history and reality itself. Beneath the desert wind, the long memory of Paracas. The wind in the desert has a way of telling stories. It slips over dunes like a whispered memory, crossing centuries, as if time were only a thin skin stretched over the earth. On the Paracas Peninsula, under a sky so bright it seems to burn, the sand kept a secret. It waited through ages of sun and silence until human hands, curious, patient, and almost reverent, peeled back its surface one layer at a time. It was 1927. The archaeologist Julio Tello walked the broken horizon, his eyes tracing the subtle swells and hollows where the dunes gathered. His team moved slowly, tools glinting in the heat, every brush of sand a breath held, then released. They were not merely digging. They were listening. And if you listen long enough in a place like this, the ground begins to answer. What they found was not a single tomb, nor a handful of scattered bones. They uncovered a world, a maze of underground chambers carved with care and purpose, each stone seated, as if by an unhurried hand that prized precision more than speed. The archaeologists would later call these chambers chulpers. The name feels simple on the tongue, but their meaning is not simple at all. Inside a hush, layered wrappings, colors that once burst from the weave, now gentled by centuries. Ceremonial blades and intricate jewelry gleamed from the half-light, their presence a quiet statement of power and privilege. And there, arranged with deliberate order, lay more than 300 skulls. They were not like ours. Elongated, refined, elegant in a way that unsettled the breath, these skulls drew the eye and refused to release it. They seemed to bend the rules of anatomy. There was something both austere and tender in their shape, something that made the heart hesitate. Were we looking at a choice, a tradition, a devotion? Or were we looking at a body telling us it had grown this way from the start? The team collected, documented, and preserved. But the desert had already begun its own work, one secret at a time, one thread at a time, reminding the living that the dead do not easily surrender their stories. Time steps backward. Radiocarbon dating is a cautious science. It does not shout. It speaks in numbers that weigh and sift the past until a window opens. The results pulled the horizon backward, 2,800 to 3,000 years ago, roughly 1,000 to 800 BCE, long before the Incas, before the Nazca lines were scored across the desert's face. In that older light, the Paracas culture emerged not as a footnote, but as one of the earliest and most intricate societies of the Andean world. This did not answer everything. It barely answered anything at all. The age told us when, not why, and it did not tell us how. Because the skulls remained. Because their shapes demanded a question that would not soften, no matter how the wind blew over the sand. A shape that refuses to be ordinary. Artificial cranial deformation is known across the world's history. In some places, baby skulls were bound with cloth or boards. Over years, the gentle pressure would guide bones to grow in long, high contours, a ritual, a badge of belonging, a sign of status, a visible identity that said, "This is who we are." So it was easy at first to say, that must be what this is. Except that the Paracas skulls were not merely elongated. They were precise, remarkably uniform. In cases so extremely extended that observers began to wonder whether cloth and board alone could achieve such forms. Some reported cranial volume claims up to a quarter beyond typical human averages, a disputed figure that nonetheless haunted the discussion. Additional anomalies, like the frequent absence of the sagittal suture that normally joins the two main plates of the skull, pressed on the boundaries of explanation. Absence of that suture can occur naturally in humans. But here, it did not feel like an accident. What could shape a pattern like this? Was it a practice? A purpose? A faith? Or was there also, beneath ritual and identity, a whisper of biology, features passed down, a heritage carried inside bone? To ask that question was to cross a line from what we see to what we are. And once you cross that line, there is only one language left that will not deceive you. DNA. The desert keeps what the desert takes. Ancient DNA is fragile. It breaks. It fades. It can be ruined by a stray breath, a fingerprint, the invisible smudge of skin cells drifting down from a researcher's sleeve. Yet Paracas offered a gift. Dryness that preserves, sand that seals, time that mummifies in silence. Hair, skin, bone, teeth. Not whole stories, but fragments, enough to assemble a grammar of ancestry. Researchers approached the work like surgeons entering a heart. They sterilized and masked, gloved and shielded, cutting the risk of contamination to the bone. They hunted for mitochondrial DNA, the genetic thread passed from mother to child, often more resilient than the nuclear genome. Samples went to laboratories across continents for independent analysis, a safeguard against bias and error. Wait long enough, and truth unveils itself. Or so we want to believe. A shock wrapped in silence. Expectations, like well-built fences, define a yard. The assumptions were clear. The Paracas would link to the indigenous populations of the Andes. The line of descent would nest within the broad pattern of South American ancestries. The fence would hold, except it didn't. What returned from those microscopes, from those sequences of A, C, G, and T, startled the mind. Instead of clean anchoring to local lineages, markers pointed elsewhere, far elsewhere. Certain haplogroups suggested links to the Caucasus, to ranges of Eastern Europe, and even to regions we call Mesopotamia. How could signatures, separated by oceans, appear in skulls entombed for 3 millennia on a Peruvian peninsula? One might argue contamination. Another might plead coincidence or misinterpretation. A third would insist, go back, test again, test better, test more. And many did. The debate tightened. The conversation struggled to contain the implications. Some later work reaffirmed the human origin of the remains beyond doubt. No non-human genetics. No secret species lurking in the dust. Human. Yes, beautifully and entirely human. Yet the puzzle of ancestry lingered, not fully dismissed, not easily explained. One result on one skull told an odd story, with a profile initially showing an absence of Native American markers. Subsequent scholarship placed Paracas clearly within an indigenous context. It was enough to press, to question, to look again. If ocean shores were crossed in deep antiquity, if contact had been wider, earlier, stranger, what would that do to our map of human movement? And if not, if the markers were misread or confounded, why did this particular corner of the past keep pushing us to the edge of what we think we know? Questions like dunes shift, but they do not vanish. If this turning point in the story has already surprised you, if the idea that the sand can hold a map that redraws our oldest journeys has opened a door in your mind, tap the like button now so that more people can walk through that door with you and discover this mystery we are unearthing together. Symbols, souls, and the shape of thought. Step away from the lab bench and back into the chamber. The air is cool. The wrappings lie like soft hills over the silent dead. Look closely at the textiles. Fine weave, careful color, patterned with an attention that breathes. These were the possessions of people who believed in beauty, in order, in the long, shared breath of ritual. To shape a head is a profound decision. It is to say that the body is not a given, but a canvas, that identity is visible, that power can be worn in the bones. Among the Paracas, the elongated skull was not merely decoration. It was the outward face of an inward world. It separated the initiated from the common, the leaders from the led. It marked those charged with memory, mediation, and meaning, keepers of secrets, guardians of ceremony, readers of whatever the sky wrote at night when the desert cooled and the stars came near enough to touch. Other cultures did similar things, the Maya, certain African groups, the Huns. Yet the Paracas execution remains singular in its refinement and extent. The uniformity, the intensity, the patient, multi-year devotion to a chosen form. If you measure commitment by how long it takes to accomplish a thing, this was a very serious commitment indeed. That is what the skulls say even before the scientists speak. We believed enough to reshape ourselves. Where anatomy and mystery meet. Modern scanning added texture to the debate. Images suggested that for some individuals, the internal structure appeared cohesively adapted to the elongated shape, as if bone had knitted along lines that were less forced than they were guided. Again, the absence of the sagittal suture appeared in patterns that invited attention. Again, claims of cranial volume increases stirred and unsettled. And again, the cautious voice of science said, variation happens. The body can be coaxed, anomalies cluster. Do not be too quick to leap from observation to conclusion. Between those poles hung a single resonant possibility. What if culture and biology collaborated? What if a population carried traits, subtle, inherited, that made shaping easier, more complete, more stable? No monsters, no myths, simply a heritage that met a ritual in the middle. And from that meeting came the head shapes that now captivate us from the far side of time. This is not a claim. It is a question. And questions are where discovery begins. If the unusual haplogroups found in the Paracas skulls are confirmed by large peer-reviewed studies, we would be facing a radical shift in our understanding of prehistory. Acknowledging that an elite in ancient Peru shared genetic lineages connected to the Old World would force historians and archaeologists to revisit long-held assumptions, and might compel us to redraw the maps of ancient human contact. The question these skulls pose is not merely scientific, but existential. Are we looking at traces of a forgotten chapter of human history, a time when continents may have been interconnected in ways we still cannot explain? Or do these anomalies point to something even older and more mysterious? The startling genetic revelations swing open a door that cannot be shut. The more we probe, the stranger and more compelling the picture becomes. Possible connections, early cultural exchanges, lineages crossing oceans and millennia. It forces us to face an unsettling truth. Our history is incomplete and far more mysterious than we dare admit. We close this episode with the sense that a major clue has been revealed, yet much remains to be uncovered. If this discovery sparked your curiosity, get ready. Our next deep dive explores these enigmas even further and may upend what you think you know about human origins. Tap the next video on your screen. The continuation of this journey is already waiting for you.